I am Kamala Harris. My pronouns are she and her. I am a woman sitting at the table wearing a blue suit.
In this age of gender confusion, personal pronouns are expected to be more than just he or she.
My pronoun is he, and I present as a he. Some trans people might look like me and present as a she.
Recently, I've come across they, and I like they. So you can refer to me either as she or they.
If you're going to build a house of gender dysphoria and homosexual born this way theory, you're going to have to come up with a lot of language that supports that theory and a lot of labels, and that's exactly what they've done throughout the last 25 years especially. And so they've invented the whole gender pronoun excesses, where you've got 25 genders that you could possibly be. They think that is normal.
This may sound confusing and perhaps harmless, but as a Loudoun County teacher with more than 27 years of experience as a teacher can testify, these custom pronouns are just the tip of the iceberg in the new sexual orthodoxy.
We essentially are being told to lie to these parents, so that these kids now are living a double life, right? At home, they're going by whatever their given name and gender is with their parents, and then at school, they're going by the opposite gender and a different name and different pronouns. And that is really tough on kids too. Like the mental health issues that creates of living a double life is not good for kids either. Not to mention just pushing them down this path of embracing an identity that isn't true, that isn't really theirs.
There have been cases in the United States where people have been fired from their jobs because they wanted to use biologically correct and accurate pronouns and names. So there was a teacher in Virginia, Peter Vlaming, who was fired from his high school because he called a student by the correct pronouns. Similarly, there was a college professor, Nicholas Merriweather, at Sewanee State, who was fired for the same reason. So we see this imposition of political correctness through the law that is leading to punishment of dissenters, who oftentimes are people with religious beliefs.
In the wake of the militant homosexual and transgender movement, there's a great deal of confusion in America today. The LGBTQ+ lobby claims that failure to accept their perceived identity is actually akin to violence, and thus the need for legal punishment.
A business could refuse service because of who you love. Housing could be denied because of your gender identity.
This is a propaganda piece for the homosexual transgender lobby group, the Human Rights Campaign. They maintain that freedom is denied in about half the country, so they push for the so-called Equality Act.
In 29 states, basic freedoms are missing.
And so the left is pushing hard for the passage of the Equality Act, which would codify into law the complete homosexual transgender agenda and make it illegal to disagree.
But it's not only people who disagree on same-sex marriage. It would also have drastic consequences for women and girls because it would impose transgender policies throughout the nation. And so single-sex spaces, like bathrooms and locker rooms, would be forced to admit men who identify as women. Similarly, in the area of healthcare, medical professionals could be sued for discrimination if they don't perform sex reassignment surgeries on people who have gender dysphoria. Parents would have fewer options for their children with gender dysphoria.
This overall push is a part of what are called SOGI laws.
SOGI stands for sexual orientation or gender identity. And we're starting to see across the country, in fact we've seen for several years recently, an attempt to insert these types of non-discrimination protections or other types of new statutory protections into law, either at the state level or at the local municipal level. And most recently in the United States Congress, we're seeing efforts like the Equality Act to try to insert these protections federally across the board.
By wokeism, what we mean generically is somebody who believes and is endorsing the SOGI laws, sexual orientation, gender identity laws, or whether it's critical race theory and reparations, all that gets under the category of so-called wokeness.
The Equality Act is a bill that seeks to add sexual orientation and gender identity to the Civil Rights Act of 1964. but it removes all religious protection that will be provided under the Religious Freedom Restoration Act.
Human beings are two sexes, and you've either got the chromosomes of a male or the chromosomes of a female, and to deny that is to deny basic reality. And to put people who have what used to be called and should be called gender dysphoria under a protected class, and to say that if you discriminate, if you say no, that you're not a different sex than you were born, that you are discriminating, and we're going to open up all the restrooms and all the other facilities to be in a protected status for this. It's insanity. It's legal insanity.
Critics note that the Equality Act would punish those who disagree with the radical LGBTQ agenda, even on religious grounds. Note the irony. The Constitution explicitly protects religious freedom, but the new sexual orthodoxy trumps that freedom, not to mention free speech as well.
They want to control speech. They're acting like fascists on campus and censors. They want conformity to their viewpoint, and they want to ostracize people who disagree with their viewpoint to the level of Klansmen. They want to turn us into the ostracized equivalent of Ku Klux Klansmen.
Well, there are a few implications for religious liberty stemming from the Equality Act. The first is that the Equality Act would penalize Americans who don't hold the same social views as others on issues like sexuality and gender identity. It would remove those protections that would normally be provided under the Religious Freedom Restoration Act. It would compel speech and require Americans to talk about these issues in the exact same manner. And lastly, of course, it seeks to gut RFRA. It essentially tries to repeal the Religious Freedom Restoration Act without actually going through the process of doing so.
The irony of this new sexual orthodoxy where anything goes except for criticism of the notion that anything goes is that in the name of compassion, they leave a wake of victims.
Well, if you listen to the transgender testimonies on social media who have detransitioned back, whether they're religious or not, hands down they will tell you how miserable they were, that the surgeries didn't change their mindset, because how can a woman really understand how a man feels, or a man understand what a woman feels? You can't. My transgender friends that have transitioned back will tell you they felt like frauds, and then they tell you the horror stories of the testosterone and the hormone shots, the hormone blockers, the estrogen, and even the surgeries that are brutal to change your gender, and not to mention the pain that goes with that, the botched surgeries. They just tell you they felt like a fraud and guinea pigs by the medical community.
This is a form of child abuse, because obviously there's a mental disturbance here. If you don't identify with how God created your body and you identify with the opposite sex, that's not just a little confusion. That's a real disconnect. There's help for that. Studies have shown that kids who are sexually confused, by the time they're out of high school, 90% recover their birth sexuality, unless they are sidetracked. See, that's the thing. The activists now want to get to the kids early and steer them along that path, regardless of the parents' wishes. One of the worst consequences of the transgender revolution is the assault on truth. Because if you can't say what's right in front of you before your very eyes, and you know to be true, and you have to concoct a lie to please the authorities, we're in a totalitarian situation here. America had gotten very complacent about the homosexual agenda, thinking, well, as long as they mind their own business and it doesn't bother me, I'm going to let it go. They don't want to let it go. They want to impose this on everyone. We've seen it at every level. But in terms of transgenderism, they're messing with science, first and foremost, saying that biology can now be dismissed out of hand as irrelevant. And it's funny, it's the same people who are always saying, follow the science. Good public policy follows the science, and that's what we'll do. Well, not when it comes to transgenderism. They throw science right out the window.
The Equality Act creates a collision course with the First Amendment, because what it is saying is many things that are taught in the Bible would no longer be legal in the employment context. And so whether churches and ministries would be forced to comply, many Christian business owners and others would find themselves in a very tough situation. It's expanding an agenda that says if you're going to be a moral employer, you will be in violation of the law.